I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yes. My name is Rhonda Dallas, and I'm the Executive Director of the Prince George's Arts and Humanities Council, and we welcome you to this wonderful event, the author Paul Porter, with his new release, Blackout. For some of you, this is your first time here. We would like to welcome you to our Arts and Entertainment District. This is the Gateway Arts District. And I also want to acknowledge my staff that's here. And we have a board member that's here as well, Raul Dennis. If you can wave your hand, you're floating around somewhere. He's in the back, publisher of Sweet Magazine. We have many partners with our events here in the Zen Room at Busboys and Poets. They have been a tremendous partner with all of our events. We have a Festival of Literary Arts that's annual, and it happens in May. And so by signing the list, you will receive information about that. So without further ado, I'd like to bring our program partner up. From Busboys and Poets, we have Christine King, Book Events Manager of Busboys and Poets Books, that would like to say a few words.
Hi, folks. I'm Chris. I'm the Book Events Manager here at Busboys and Poets Books. For those of you who don't know, all of the Busboys and Books bookstore locations are now Busboys Books, no longer Politics and Prose. And we're working very hard to go into each location and expand and diversify our selection. So far, we've done 14th and V, 5th and K, Tacoma and Hyattsville. Next up, we have Shirlington, and then finally Brookland as well. And along with that, we have a really great lineup of book events this fall. So if you just check us out on busboysandpoets.com, you can find all that. Thank you so much.
And several of you have asked about the books. After the panel is over, Paul will be signing books, and books are at the bookstore. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the event over to our facilitator of the evening, Teodros Melchishua Williams. Teodros?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Okay, you all can call me Teo for short. So just a little bit about myself. So Teodros Mukesh Williams. I'm an associate professor at Bowie State University, and I run a program called Visual Communication and Digital Media Arts. And the reason I brought that all up is because we also launched a minor in hip-hop studies and visual culture. We were fortunate to have Paul as a guest, so I'm really honored to be here. It's a wonderful book, and I wanted to say thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate it, and thanks to Rhonda and Busboys and Poets. So I guess quick introductions. I don't have to introduce this gentleman, but I will. The wonderful Paul Porter, who I'm going to let him give you his bio and background. But I also wanted to introduce Dr. Jared Ball, who's a professor at Morgan State University, Department of Communications as well. So let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Greetings, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here. First of all, I'd like to thank these two fine gentlemen that I have the utmost of respect for, because I could have done it by myself. But I'm not that, even though I might be a ham, but I respect them. And Dr. Ball over there, man, he's my militant guy that sort of tunes me in all the time. But for me, tonight's special. It's special because some of the faces that I see here tonight is special due to this book that was a dream at one time. About 9 years ago, I signed a book deal with HarperCollins. Wrote this book that I thought was a great book. And the problem with the book was what this Blackout is all about. The problem was that I was telling the truth in the book. And HarperCollins, at the time, owned part of BMG. And BMG Records, had bosses like Clive Davis and some of the folks that I knew. So all of a sudden my book got X'd out, and I was like, wow, consolidation happens in everything. But, like you find out in time, everything gets better. And it might take a little while, and it might have taken 8, 9 years. And Reva Harris, who's here, was a old classmate at Northeastern, and she's retired, living a good life because she did the good things. And she said she'd help me do this new book. I'm proud of it because Blackout, the title Blackout, don't let it scare you. You know, sometimes when you put black in anything, it scares some folks. Blackout, the definition in this book that caught me for blackout was a temporary loss of consciousness. And I think we're all guilty of it. Sometimes, you know, situations that happen, over time we get desensitized, we get lazy. And the best thing about this book is I admit my faults, because nobody in this room is perfect or even close. You know, I've been blessed to work with some great people and have some good times and some bad times. But this book is about good and bad. I know the highlight grabber is always going to be the bad, or wow, you talk bad about Kathy Hughes, or you talk bad about so-and-so. But they can change too. You know, that was my experience. So hopefully this evening we'll get to talk about different things in the book. These gentlemen will lead us through it so I don't get long-winded like I can in my DJ voice. And let's get the ball rolling and we'll keep things popping. And thank you, Rhonda Dallas and PG Arts and Humanities Council for making this happen. And the folks from CSpan and Book TV that are recording this, okay?
Wonderful. All right. So I wanted to start this because the way I wanted to start, I was actually trying to tweet this event, and I kept typing blackout, and, you know, kept coming up with the blackout of the NFL. So this, I was like, oh, it was a very interesting connection. And the blackout of the eclipse that just happened. So there's a lot of kind of things that we can use as metaphors. All right, but very quickly, Paul. So I grew up here in the DMV area, 70s and 80s. You know, I call myself sort of the cousin of go-go and hip-hop. You know, we all born around the same time. And so your book really sparked a lot of things in terms of memories for me, and a lot of things that I think I knew about the music industry, you know, as a consumer of music and consumer of media, but didn't really know until you put it in your book. And I would call it sort of this Rip Van Winkle effect. And, you know, if a person who slept for 20 years and suddenly, you know, like Rip Van Winkle, who slept for 20 years and woke up and suddenly he slept through the revolution. And so I kind of see a similar thing with music and media and radio. I feel, and I call it like the death of radio. And the question I had is, yeah, it seemed like radio died at a certain point. I used to listen to the radio. I think we all used to listen to the radio. And so it's probably been about 20 years since I've actually listened to the radio, like turned it on, not in passing, not, you know, just in terms of really, really enjoying it. And so in the chapter of your book, chapter 8, The Era of the Shock Jock, I just want to read a couple quotes. You refer to the subjects of overpaid and what I would dare say is destructive shock jocks, Paul, and specifically the story of Aaron Patterson of Chicago, who was, this is on page 102, he was incarcerated for 17 years, on death row for 13 years for 2 murders that he maintained he didn't commit. And then you continue in this story and trying to sort of get his story out to the media, and you definitely talk about some challenges there. I just want to read one quote that you have here. So Aaron was choked and disgusted by what he heard on the radio. In prison, he spent more time reading than listening to music. And because he was in solitary confinement most of the time, he didn't come into contact with some of the young people who were coming in from off the street. Aaron couldn't believe what hip-hop artists were able to stay on the radio. He marveled at the fact that they were essentially spelling out how to make and how to sell drugs in plain language, and that anyone could understand. No one questioned it. Aaron also noticed the treatment toward women had changed a lot since he was thrown in jail in 1986. I don't understand, he said, to me more than once, Why are they playing this kind of stuff on the radio? This is poison. So Paul, and for Jared and you all as well, when did radio die? And you know, if so, if radio did die, you know, to whose benefit was it? To whose detriment in terms of the death of radio?
I'm going to pass this to Dr. Ball, and I'll pick up. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, first of all, First of all, Paul, thank you for writing the book.
Yes.
And thanks to everybody for coming and having this event. I think it's a very important event because one of the major problems, particularly for those of us who study and try to teach about these realities and the structure of media, is that how popularity is determined is difficult to address. To explain, and there's an assumption that what becomes popular is popular because it's just that good, and that there's no politics or no system or no structure behind it. Yeah. My initial reaction to so I think the book is very important for not only for those of us, I agree, who grew up in this area and are familiar with a lot of the names that you talk about. Your book your book is chock full of detail and background that is exciting to read for those of us who are familiar with the names, and I think for those who are not familiar with the names and the history, it's great in terms of introducing people to a history and a system and a politics that many of us are not familiar with. My short answer, that said, my shortest answer to your question is, I'm not aware of any moment where radio was alive. In a sense that one of the problems that I think we have is that our relationship to all the institutions in this society is a hostile one. So there are moments where once we get involved with something, this in terms of Black America gets involved with something, that there is a moment of progress. It happens in politics, it happens in media, and then there's a retrenchment, a response. And I think your book is sort of the response. Like, there is a moment where Black radio becomes a potential moment for a progress or a progressive a moment in terms of politics, cultural expression, etc. And then the system sort of reorganizes itself to say, okay, wait a minute. We're not going to allow all of this to so in other words, I'm saying that the death of radio that I think you're talking about has to be held in the context of the standard being that it's never been that good. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
But getting back to, that's a great point that you brought up with Aaron Patterson. Right. I got hooked up with Aaron Patterson through Lisa Fager and Industry Ears, my nonprofit. And she told me Aaron's story. He had just got pardoned by the governor in Chicago, and he was coming. He did Oprah. I forgot the name of the guys that got pardoned. And I picked him up in Manhattan, and we rode around, and he was this in shock. You know, the images, the things that he heard, but it had blended into my world. He came, when he went in prison, radio for him was a source of power, information, and all, you know, just a whole different vibe. And he made me learn. It's funny, just last week he called me collect. He's back in prison because they set him up one more time. But well, that's another story.
What's interesting about your book is that you talk about the struggle of getting him on Black radio. Even after being on Oprah,
but
Black
that's,
radio struggled, or Black radio host struggled to let him on.
Black radio's a myth. It's not Black radio anymore. It's radio stations that cater to Black listeners. They don't cater to information. They don't cater to anything really positive. You know, they do the Christmas jam and the back to school jam. But, you know, the days when I started in radio, it was a whole different vibe.
PFW, sorry about that.
Yeah, and there's a few. I'm talking about the commercial. I'm talking about the commercial radio outlets. It's a big difference. It's all about ratings. And Aaron Patterson, he taught me a lot by him talking about the music. You know, we had a great discussion with Funk Master Flex because I was working at Hot 97 in Kiss in New York, and we got into this debate. But I was like, man, have some balls, put them on the air. He didn't. And I think that's what happens a lot of times now. Everything is about keeping a job. It's not about being conscious. And as we get higher up on the totem pole, it seems like, because I've known people that I love to death, and I've seen them go from regional manager to vice president, and as they climb and the dollars climb, their mind sags behind when it comes to, you know, real moments. But I'm glad you brought up Aaron, because that was a powerful piece of the book to me, and a powerful person.
Thank you. Okay, and so, taking this whole thing of the shock jock, this leads me to sort of my next question, which is you spend a lot of time discussing Paola, and I never really understood the concept, and so if you could sort of just quickly elaborate this whole thing of Paola and how this fed into a lot of the things we're talking about as it relates to, black radio or radio in general, and that's my next question was, does it still exist to some degree?
Look, everybody always asks me that question. Does capitalism exist in America? Yes. Is there a reason why you hear the same song all over the country at the same time, 24/7? It's money. Payola or pay for play is how the world moves, and it's different from the early days where they would fly you out and have parties and give you cocaine and drugs and a couple of $100. Now they just put direct deposits in your LLC. When I was and that's why I started out the book with Karen Klein. Karen Klein was the name of the FedEx that goes to programmers every Saturday with cash in the envelope. I was at Hotel George. This was after leaving New York. I came back to program Black Entertainment Television. I had no idea. I get a FedEx envelope. I open it up, 4 envelopes with $5,000 in $100 bills, 20 grand in it. And the name said Karen Klein. I never knew Karen Klein. I got a call on Monday.
Calvin's sister?
Nah. I got a call, and I did not put this brother's name in the book because he would shoot me tomorrow. And I'm bold, but he's about 6'6", 290. And like when I first met him, he told me, I did 9 years in prison. So I keep real tight about my people. But anyway, get back to it. It's like, welcome to BET. And I was in shock, because Paola would be free trips, when somebody puts money down on your hotel room. But basically, Paola is not illegal. You're just supposed to announce it. Like when you hear a radio station announce, we're doing a trip to go see so-and-so in Europe by Interscope Records, that's Paola, but they don't tell you about the songs that you hear in heavy rotation every 70 minutes.
And they don't say, we got a big bag of cocaine and 20 grand to play this song every hour and an hour. So here it is again, everybody, listen.
Yeah, and that's, I've been on panels with FCC commissioners. I've tried to, document this tale of how it's, we've went from lyricists to the lyrically challenged to, you having battles with kids on mumble rap. It's rare when hip-hop said so much for so long, and it still does, but what commercial radio has chosen to play. But Paola's the reason why things are like they are. And it's even bigger now. It's into streaming and Spotify, and, they're all controlled. So it
hasn't changed. I mean, that was definitely something I wanted to raise with you, because a lot of the students, for instance, that end up in my classroom will say, and when I share this history, they'll say, but it's different now. We have YouTube, we have Spotify, we have Pandora. Everybody's getting paid. We can hear whatever we want. But when I've looked at the numbers, it seems very similar.
It's just like a playlist, because Spotify and Pandora, they have playlists that everybody goes to, like Rap Caviar. That's like a hot list. But labels buy positions like they buy on everything else. Look, the record business is something that people fail in. 9 out of 10 projects fail. And if music was that easy to promote, all the great artists would promote it on their own and not stay with labels. But it's so dirty that they don't want to try it on their own. And the ones that do, they get burned.
Yeah.
Interesting. You want to pitch it? Okay.
No, yeah, I mean, One of the things that comes up for me in your book, and I'm not going to impose my own analysis on you, or make you suffer it, as my own. But one of the things that comes up is that, a lot of, again, in my classrooms and just in general, there's this idea that because we see black people in high places, we see black ownership, we see black executives, we see black performers and hosts. We see Barack Obama. There's an assumption that we're making an advance here. And I think that your book, even in your critiques of people like Kathy Hughes and Alfred Liggins, beyond the personal, there's something you're saying about what institutions impose on us as individuals. In other words, what is your book, or what would you say your book is saying about the idea or just the existence of black leadership or black faces in high places?
It's funny, I thought that was the answer, and I know it helps having different people of color in situations of power when it comes to producers and picking news stories and everything else. But in ownership, it hasn't really changed much, And I know Radio One's a great company, and some folks here have made some money from Radio One, but they're playing the same corporate game as iHeart or anybody else. Bob Johnson, I talked about Bob. At least Bob Johnson was honest at BET.
You have a scandalous quote from him in there. I don't know if you want to share it or make people buy the book for it, but you have a scandalous quote from Bob Johnson.
Yeah, but he just told us that if you're here to make money in advance, you're at the wrong place. And that's cool, because he was honest,
But you also said that he said BET is not for black people, it's for me and my family.
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean.
That's deep. A lot of people are under the assumption he created something for.
Yeah, but he created a business, and that's how he thought of it. And I think sometimes we get caught up thinking that somebody's black and is going to do something for all black people. And, maybe that could be the way, but it's not the way for everybody. So, and I don't have any beef with Kathy Hughes or Bob Johnson.
She still owes you money, though.
Yeah, but I just told my story, and I pray and hope that they change, because there's enough in it for everybody. Because I know people that have, worked there for years and years, and they provided for families. But I think it could be more. Look, I mentioned in the book, I worked at Magic in D.C. and part-timers were paid $10 an hour back in 1988. And I used to always, because we had a terrible payroll system, I would always double the pay. Because at KYS, a 4-hour shift paid $240, and at Magic, a 4-hour shift paid $40. So where do you want to work?
And they're playing the same thing. It's to your point, too.
Yeah, they're playing the same games. And of course, billing's different and everything. But the scary part is 29 years later at Radio One, some people are still getting paid $10 an hour to be on air. So, yeah, I'm dead serious. So, I mean, you got to think about that. And look, and I'm not trying to change your idea on people's champions, and if your communications college is named after somebody, that's cool. But just know that endowment came off the backs of somebody else. That's all I'm saying. And I love you. I love you, Miss Hughes. All right.
Well, a quick slide to the right. Can you talk more? You mentioned a lot about the FCC, and in terms of, can you talk a little bit more in terms of the FCC and when things started to change in terms of a lot of the things that were allowed by the FCC and certain things they didn't allow in terms of decency and that type of thing? I mean, you show the hypocrisy.
I've been on the board at Parents Television Council, which is probably the largest watchdog organization for, and the FCC is useless in terms of enforcement. And like I said, commissioners will tell me that. There's no level of, care. They don't put money in. the FCC is like the rest of the government. They're trying to make money. They're trying to license and do things. And enforcement, you can listen to a murder on the radio, and unless, you know, a petition comes from Parent Television Council with, you know, 200,000 signatures, like they'll latch on to a boob, but you can hear "I'm in love with the Coco" all day. And it's up to communities to, you know, push the button. And that's the hardest thing, man. Because the way, you know, you guys were talking about radio early, and the brilliance of radio is when we once had family stations for all formats, and they all decided to break it up and say, we want your kids listening to this. We're going to give you time joining, doing the same thing in 140 markets, and we're going to keep you adults happy, and you don't know what's happening with your kids. And that's why you might think radio hasn't worked for you, but really the numbers are up for radio. And I know there's options, but radio still controls things. And it's just that they've split us up. You know, they don't have to serve you anymore. They're serving a younger audience, or they're serving somebody that wants to go see the Whispers and some of the older groups. And
I just want to say very quickly that I think your book does a service to a lot of the younger people and what people in general who are first or just now joining this struggle over media reform. And you know, the ramping up of the battle over net neutrality, and a lot of people having to address themselves to the FCC. And I think when they read your book, even in a different context, you're not talking about the internet per se, but you're talking about the function of the FCC to manage for business the public airwaves that technically belong to all of us. And if you look at the incestuous relationship between the FCC, just like many other branches of government, and the private sector, it's hard to imagine that they would regulate somebody that they're then going to go and work for when they leave the FCC, or vice versa, or come from that industry and then regulate it in a way that would be beneficial, particularly to black people. So I think that when people read your book and the examples you talk about in terms of the FCC and its relationship to producing and popularizing a version of our culture that's harmful, particularly to black youth, I think, again, you've provided a very valuable service here that people can pick up from and extend in terms of their own work in the contemporary moment, you know. So. Now, I did have. Well, go ahead. No, go ahead.
As a matter of fact, I'm keeping this free flowing, and I'm gonna let you all ask some questions as well. So.
Oh well,
go ahead.
I just got a question here.
Okay.
Well, a clarification. When I was talking earlier about Aaron Patterson,
yes,
and having a discussion, and I failed to mention Sway, who I also, Sway Calloway, and Sway's my boy now. We had fights up there at Hot 97, okay? And Sway wasn't feeling it then because he was new in New York, just came from California, and so you can take that bad as a bad thing for Sway, but like I talk about my weaknesses. I snorted half of Peru, you know? I mean, I was in D.C. in the 80s. I was telling a story earlier, off air, that I'll share here, and I'm proud to tell the story because I bounced back. I walked into a drug dealer's apartment one day, and I walk in, and who do I see? And let him rest in peace. I see Mayor Barry, Jim Vance, and John Kennedy Jr. Wow. All on the couch. Wow. And I wasn't high. So I'm looking at them like, and I knew them all, but I also know when you get high, you have that dumb look. Useless in terms. And I realized I was going to be dumb, and probably 30 minutes later, we're all. But I have no problem talking about my weaknesses.
Well, but see, what I think, and I appreciated that in your book, and what I think is important for particularly for those of us who are educators, is that a lot of people don't come off looking good in your book, including, as you say, at times you. But what I think is important about what you're presenting here, at least as I interpret it, is that, And all of us are potentially can succumb to our institutional environment. So if you are, this whole idea, now as I read the book, as I read your stories, I'm looking to use it to make the argument that we cannot keep arguing for individual self-help solutions, because we throw people as individuals into these institutional environments and then they're helpless. So of course everybody's going to be at least encouraged to behave as you described they behave, in terms of taking payola, drugs, promoting a negative version of our culture. All of this is going to be encouraged by these institutions. So I think it's, again, I'm not trying to give you false praise because you're my boy and we're in public, but I think you really have done a service here to give a very real story, a personal experience that says, look, we're all struggling and these institutions encourage this pattern of behavior. And we can't expect individuals by themselves to overcome it. But yeah,
you know, it's kind of funny though. I was kind of forced into it too, because when I got fired in New York, I was mad, and I decided to talk out when, you know, I talk about Barry Mayo in there, and you know, anyway, I got the boot. I lost everything, man. I was living in my car, you know, but I just decided to fight because I was. You know, and until you're at your lowest point, sometimes you don't see really clearly. You're always worried about keeping stuff. Well, I had nothing, you know, so I got to see everything clearly and said, you know, I'm going to reinvent myself, and maybe it's not going to be a, you know, Night Flight 93 on WKYS, because I was tired of it, you know, and fast forward many years later, I have my own radio station in Orlando, a low-power FM. It might only go 25 miles in radius, but guess what? Everything that I know is on there. I know what messages we're going to do, how.
It's worldwide.
Yeah,
we got worldwide.
Yeah, we got a mentorship program, and the Orlando, where me and my partner Paul Billings picked Pine Hills. We picked it because it was the street name. You know, there's always that neighborhood that comes on the news first story at 11 o'clock. So in Orlando, it's Pine Hills, or crime kills, or pine kills. And every day you hear about shootings. And when we bought the station, within the first 45 days, we had 13 homicides in a 3-mile radius of our studios. I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. But we do candlelight vigils. We took kids off the street, teaching them to be broadcasters. We're not making any money yet, but I'm having a lot of fun. You know, I'm back to my DJ name. DJ broke his, anyway, but it's fun and the station's growing. But I know that's not going to come from iHeartRadio. And we're playing hip-hop. I didn't want to play. I could blow Urban AC Radio out the box. It's funny, I was listening to Donnie Simpson on his 40th anniversary yesterday on the radio. And he was playing Boogie Nights by Heatwave. And I was like, whack. Like, even for the era, it's not what's happening. You know, there's like in radio, we have songs that you research and it comes out fatigue, popularity, and recognition. So the guys, the studious guys that run these radio stations in certain markets, they have these set of rules that don't make any sense. You know, there's like old songs you never want to hear again, you know, and Boogie Nights is one of those songs. Maybe a couple people might want to hear it, but the majority, but it's like, you know, there's a feel. Yeah, there's a feel, and there's no feeling in radio anymore. It's like some research list that gets, and if you don't care, you don't care, but I'd have a fit if that, man, anyway. But that's where the passion, and in the old days, we didn't have everything on computer. We had it on cue cards. So I would skip over that song, or skip over this one, and put these songs together. But you still can do it now. if this could sound better. And some of the messages that I hear today, day in and day out, I think we're all selfish. And that's why Blackout's about really, you know, and I know everybody, both of you say, I haven't listened to the radio in a long time. Well, guess what? There's a zillion other people that do. And if you're saying you don't care about everybody, and I know it's not for everybody to go down this path and be on this journey, but it is for me. It doesn't pay well. It's funny, like I've done every historically black college tour, and I love my HBCs, but nobody's going there getting rich. You know, it's funny, a guy from Harvard called me after reading the book. He's been at the law school. So he said, you know, Paul, we want to bring you in to do a couple of lectures. So I'm like, oh man, I'm getting paid. Then click, click in my head, I'll go, see, there goes the sucker in you. Now you're better because you got that call from Harvard. So it's always checking yourself. And I use my own system of check and balances, even though I will go cash that check when the time comes. But I don't want to get consumed of talking to Harvard students when I can also talk to, you know, a classroom for free somewhere. And that's what's important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I want to circle back to your work with Industry Is and Rap Rehab, but I wanted to see if it's okay to go ahead and let's open it up for the floor. And
Sure.
Yeah, so just so we can keep this moving. So if anyone have any questions, we want to actually, if you can give it a moment, we get the microphone to you first. Any questions, comments for Paul?
And be bold.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. I see Princess of Poetry over there at my sister. Okay.
Hey, Tony, can you come up and hold the mic?
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, keep your big head out the shot.
Okay.
Hello. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to be here. Real quick, I just want to comment on your Boogie Nights because I follow Donnie Simpson. I love him just like I love you. And he said I didn't hear him. I listened to some of him, but Boogie Nights was the first song he played when he started at KISS 40 years ago. So that's probably why he played it.
No, they play it anyway.
But anyway,
But-
I'm glad to be here, and I'm a big, big music lover. I do concerts, and I channel hop. Everything from PFW, I listen to Wash, Wash FM, of course Kathy Stations, and of course HUR, my own CDs and everything. And I am thankful when I get to hear people who live in the community play the music because they can talk like PFW does. We know what's going on in the community versus the syndicated shows. I want to know how you feel about our syndicated shows with the Tom Joyners and the Michael Baisdens and things like that. For me, I think they take away a lot of the local stuff going on.
Okay. All right. Well, I hate syndication. I think for people of color, radio was the only thing that was sort of solid in their communities, the civil rights struggle and everything else. So when I hear and Tom Joyner on in a zillion markets and a zillion people lose jobs, and my son worked for Steve Harvey as a producer for 7 years. I hate Steve Harvey, okay? But there's a reason why black radio is the most syndicated format with 75% less stations, but you hear the same voices in the same markets. So don't go to sleep on that. And I know y'all love Tom and love Steve, but there's a reason why they cut away the voices and the music, and it's real simple. Because guess what? I've been on a zillion shows talking about the issues, never on a syndicated show ever. And they all know me well, but they will not touch it.
Paul, and I know you wanted to get importantly to Rap Rehab and Industry Ears, but part of what your work there does, and I want to make sure that this is clarified in this conversation, is you address this issue of the relationship between behavior in the community and the popular dissemination of ideas through popular music. And a lot of people, I know they end up in my classrooms often, a lot of people in conversations resist the idea that there's a relationship between the behavior of young people or people in general and what is popularly disseminated through their radio. So could you address that a little bit? You know, so when you say you hate a Steve Harvey, you hate syndication, you hate what's happened to black radio, what specifically are you saying is the relationship between what we hear on the radio and the behavior or the treatment of people in their lived experience in communities? Does that,
Look, it's not only radio though; it's television.
Oh no,
it's like,
and it's media in general.
Yeah, media. It's like I had long discussions because, you know, when you talk about struggle and timing, like when folks talk about Reverend Sharpton, and we talk about leaders, and he's probably one of the biggest leaders of voices in this country for people of color. But what's the difference of him and 50 years ago? He's on network TV. He's making a network salary. So there's some things that it doesn't go with the network. And to get those big checks, Martin and Malcolm wouldn't have had a television show, okay? And I'm not taking it away because everybody's gig is their gig. But sometimes I always think a little harder on it, you know? And Reverend does good work sometimes. And we all do good work sometimes. But I can't trust a voice, you know, if you see me all of a sudden with a big gig and a television show, things might change. I might decide to do it right, you know? I might get a Bugatti and be like, hey, cheese. Yeah.
No, and I would add the next question. I mean, yeah, we remember Melissa Harris Perry. Remember Al Sharpton used to be at a certain time. Now he's Sunday morning, 8 o'clock. So there's also, you know, we're seeing these voices disappear as well and being.
Yeah,
shifted,
but my girl Joy Reid wrote on the back of the book.
Okay.
I got Joy Reid.
We got one left, Joy. Thank God for Joy.
I love my girl
absolutely.
Joy.
No,
all
Joy.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So, next question or comment? Sure.
Yeah, hi. Good evening. So somebody up there just said it's not just radio, it's television.
Yes.
And, you know, black music and music in general has been influencing young people since the first woman sang a lullaby to a child someplace in Africa. So my question is, there are not any kids in this room right now. And those of us who are concerned are all people who, at least in the 80s, were old enough to listen to radio. Maybe some at the very beginning of the 90s, but we're talking about systems in terms of the media that used to be regulated by the federal government through the FCC in a way that people could affect them. Now, today, we can't even affect an election. So my question is, how do young people learn, first of all, to listen to what they should be listening to so they will stay woke instead of sleep? Right. And secondly, how do they affect the political process? You know, because it used to be you go to a music show and there were politicians that you would see John Conyers and, you know, people would show up back in the day. Politics was not a dirty word and it wasn't an empty word. And so my question is, how does the political process reach down to the young folks? Because you can still talk to kids. Absolutely. You still have it, you know, and they'll listen to you. They won't necessarily listen to somebody older, and they may not listen to mom and dad. Absolutely. But there has to be a way for you to reach young people. So how is that?
Go ahead. Yeah, get it.
All right. So I teach at Bowie State University, and if you all know, we lost a student killed by a white supremacist, Richard Collins, that was killed last year. And so not only that, I think it was last year, someone came to our campus and sprayed a lot of racist graffiti. And so as a professor, I use hip-hop in our hip-hop studies. We not only study it, and I know he does it as well at Morgan State, but we went to Baltimore. We went, you know, and after Freddie Gray was killed, we would actually go and visit and see the connections between the music and the politics, as you mentioned. But I think a lot of it is giving the young people an opportunity to study themselves. Now, when I said I created a minor in hip-hop studies at Bowie State, it was an uphill battle. People didn't want this. I was actually shot down. Hip-hop? What the hell? Hip-hop? A minor in hip-hop? You crazy? But when I started researching this and I see all these other institutions studying us, except us, as a former, I taught at Howard University as well. I know it was only a certain amount of time at Howard University you could even study jazz. So I think we have to be willing to be in a place where we can put ourselves into academia and study ourselves, if it's hip-hop, if it's gospel, if it's jazz. But at the same time, we do need to make these connections, because we don't just listen to hip-hop for hip-hop's sake in my class, but we look and see how is this connected socially, politically, economically, how is this affecting you right now? How is this administration, last time I taught this course, it was a couple semesters ago, but how is this administration, how does this fit into hip-hop and politics as well? But I think using hip-hop just as I call it a vehicle, but at the same time, it's gonna open up a lot of doors if it's sociology, if it's politics, if it's anthropology, if it's art, if it's music, if it's culture. So we try to deal with these things at the university, but it's not just in the classroom. Sometimes we have to go to Baltimore, we have to go to Ferguson, or we have to go wherever.
Okay. Can I just say very quickly? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure,
No, go ahead.
I just want to say very quickly, we have to remember the context. I was trying to make this point early, the context of the relationship we have with the institution of media. We should even remember that C-SPAN, Brian Lamb was clear, C-SPAN itself was created because he was frustrated at the lack of coverage he saw of Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael specifically, in commercial media. And he said, we need a media channel that will allow for someone to be heard in their entire context, as opposed to reduced to some soundbite for commercial television. So that's why we have C-SPAN, in part because what even Brian Lamb was aware of was that the relationship that black people and people in struggle have to commercial media is a hostile one. So we have to remember, and I slightly would just even disagree with the characterization of the FCC. The FCC was created specifically to manage the transfer of public airwaves to private entities, and to manage and to allow those private entities to carry and dominate what we get in our public commercial media. So that's why we have, from 1934 to today, a media system that ends up with Paul Porter having to write a book reminding us of this, as I interpret it, this hostile relationship. That even well-meaning individuals who enter into this media environment are going to be institutionally turned against their own people. So in terms of the alternatives, we have to realize, as Paul was saying, we are set in a situation where, parenting is an exercise in powerlessness. My own children are dragged away from me on a daily basis. We have to not only develop alternative media, but develop, I think, a more radical and hostile critique of commercial media, and understand that we need to walk away from it because it exists only to create these problems.
You see why I got these two guys here? I'm no fool. But that's exactly why I wrote this book, to sort of say, and it's strange, I'm not a big reader myself, so I wanted to make a book that everybody could read and enjoy and tell stories and hopefully pick something up and share. But books aren't in anymore. The folks don't read, and I can tell who's buying this book or who's passing on this book to kids or younger folks, and it ain't many. And that's, it's a whole cycle that we have to fight about, and it's just not black folks, it's white folks, it's everybody wants a visual. Everybody wants it in 60 seconds. Everybody wants Snapchat. When the music industry signs an artist over an Instagram, a 60-second Instagram, and says it's hot, you can see how low the standard's been. And so, I hope that we start doing some work and stop looking for other people to do your work. We always want somebody to lead the charge. I'm doing my work, and it's great when people come to help you. And I get sort of excited when people do something for me, because I've done so much for so many. There's somebody, Victoria Christopher Murray, who's an author here, who doesn't know me from Adam, and reached out and helped me to give some marketing tools to get this book out. And I know everybody on planet Earth. And yeah, Joy Reid was great when but it doesn't happen, you know? And I love people. I love them, you know, and I've done things for people all the time, but we're scared to do for others. And we're scared to speak up. So I just hope everybody speaks up. What's that?
Question? Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
It's the lights, the lights.
Yeah, I do need glasses, but go ahead.
I just wanted to, we talked about young people. I'm Lisa Fager, by the way, and
I mentioned you earlier, so be chilled.
oh, okay.
You're here late. All right now.
But I wanted Jared, if he could, to also expound on, we were talking about young people. Jared and I, on behalf of Industry Ears, had worked together when he was at Maryland, a little bit at Morgan, but that was a really good social experiment. We literally asked these young people to listen to the lyrics of the words. First, we had them read what the FCC says about indecency, which says no sexually explicit content could be played after 6 a.m., between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., which of course you know is not followed by. So at the time, the FCC said, you know, you had to complain. So we had them listen to it, interpret it themselves, and then, this is so good, and then follow up with following complaints to the FCC. And at the time, they didn't have electronic forms. That's something that Paul and I put together and did electronic form to the FCC, and then a year later, they worked it out.
Let's get off.
She works at the FCC. We're not going to put her on the spot. But one of the things I would love for you to say, some of the things that the kids learned because they had never really listened to the music. They used to say, we just listened to the beat, and by the end, they were like, we can't listen anymore.
First of all, I just want to, I'm glad, Lisa, that you're here because it gives me, it's a perfect point for me to just quickly say that from Lisa Fager and Paul Porter, I've learned a tremendous amount. And one of the reasons why I think this book is so important is because those of us who try to study this through some sort of traditional academic or even journalistic route are going to constantly come up short. And the information that Lisa and Paul provide through Industry Ears and just in general continues to be instrumental to me and many others. So when we did this project, I mean, I remember it very well. And you know, the students were first of all shocked to listen carefully to lyrics, absent the beat, to learn about the context of the institution, how songs get promoted, how songs end up, and what to do with the FCC. And then they were also shocked to learn, when we did the follow-up, even at Morgan, how little was done with what they reported to the FCC. So they learned structurally that there is a lot more that has to happen than just even an appeal to the FCC because of I would argue at least, the relationship that these institutions have to the broader political ideological need of promoting this nonsense. So anyway, I hope I've done a good enough job in this quick to summarize that report. But I do want to say again how important the work that you all have done is to all of us in learning how this stuff works. Yeah, anyway.
You know, social media, and everybody knows, they read their Facebook timelines. And it's really scary how something on social media is now like the topic that everybody wants to go up against. Like, how many posts have you seen about boycott the NFL over Colin Kaepernick? It's not support and don't get me wrong, people support certain things, but a lot of the focus is like flash and gone, and we've missed out on some of the long things and the teaching moments. And that's what I hope you get out of Blackout. The book is a temporary loss of consciousness that we all, you know, we fall victim to.
Absolutely. Is there another question or comment?
More of an acknowledgement of the panels who got chimed in on this. I think everybody's kind of aware that there was a warrant sought after for data from an anti-Trump website. And 20 minutes ago, it looks like it was just approved by a DC judge, approving a government warrant seeking data from an anti-Trump website, which means now folks' names will be turned over to this group. I wanted to know how you might want to respond to that.
How do I feel about being included in that? Because I'm in that group. I'm gonna let you take it.
No, go ahead.
Trump. Please don't get me started on Trump tonight. We'll be here for 3 hours. I really don't care, to be quite honest with you. I think there's always like this fear. We're in a new stage of fascism. Let's just call it what it is. So I'm sorry you want me to talk about it. And so I was having this conversation with some colleagues at the university today in terms of, I had a chance to go to study Nazi Germany and go to Israel and do all this research on the Holocaust. And I just remember, that the Nazis had one radio station, they had one TV station, and that was it. It was one message. And so this whole thing of sort of collecting names, it's fascism. It's like just an extended version of that. So I don't particularly have any issue with, I have issue with it, but I'm not fearful of it because I know that the power certainly rests in the people to stand up to oppression, to stand up to fascism. We definitely see that now. So in terms of, I'm an artist, I'm a professor, I'm a filmmaker. I can challenge it with media and images, but I don't really, to me, I think the fear is on the other side. We witnessed this in Charlottesville a couple of weeks ago. At the core of white supremacy, at the core of fascism is fear. So I think for us to be fearless as people, and I'm saying all people, of the global majority, and that includes everyone, to stand up against oppression and fascism. But no, I don't have any fear. Paul?
Oh, no. It's a world of no fear for me. But I just wanted to get back when Lisa was mentioning dealing with kids. There's a part in this book, it's really the favorite part where I had my, lack of a better word, epiphany. I was working in New York and volunteering at a elementary school, and that's when a young 12-year-old came up to me with a note. She knew I worked at Hot 97 and KISS, and she said, "Mr. Paul, can you get this record off the radio?" And the title of the record that I always knew that this didn't sound right was Raw Digger, and the chorus was "Gotta beat that bitch with a bat." And when she looked at me and said it, I said, "What's wrong?" And she's crying, and she said, "My mother got beat up by my father with a bat. And the kids make fun of me every time I hear that record. Every time they hear that record." And I said, if this young lady is so alert and telling me that it makes a difference in her life, I got to do something about it. And we've had these discussions all the time, but it's putting an action behind the discussion. And that's what Facebook does. It lets you talk about it, be really lazy. "Oh, I'm not gonna watch today. I'm not gonna watch this," and that's it. But sometimes it's something that drills into you. And I see her face all the time. And that was a big thing for me.
To your point, Rod Digger more recently has been arguing in her battles with whoever, Remy and whoever, that the lyricism has dumbed down. That's right. And she even did a track titled Angela Davis. So, it's maybe she heard you too.
Yeah,
because Rod Digger is dope. I love
mean,
Rod Digger.
And I know, but that's what,
yeah.
And that's why I talk about in the book. You can get better. David Banner was one guy a long time ago, and now he's a great voice. So, we can all change or get better over the course of time. That's all.
Is another question or comment? I can't see. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, it's Tamara.
My name is Tamara Wellens, singer, songwriter, independent artist.
Plug.
Wonderful. I'm going to plug her. She's phenomenal.
What's the website, baby?
Myself,
No. Okay.
I want to know, so I have one question, and is if the radio is outdated, is it still relevant? I went to Bowie State, and I came from the Tidewater area. I was listening to 103 jams. I got introduced to house music, reggae. They played everything. We had mixtapes. I loved it. went to Bowie. I was hooked into WHUR, and it's just a different world right now and we talked about this earlier, the generation that maybe not here, maybe it's not here, how relevant is radio right now? Should we?
Can I answer this one?
Yes.
Because I know some of these brilliant educators and folks will tell you it's not relevant. Well, guess what? They still make millions of dollars, and they still have plenty of listeners and impact a lot of minds. It might not be as relevant in some of our worlds, but they found some new fools. And they're still dumbing it down, so let's never think that it's not. When you can buy an FM station for $1 million, then it's not relevant anymore.
But this comes up in my classes all the time. Students say this all the time, and I try to point out, in fact, using Paul's work, that the process that went into promoting a song on radio is the exact process used to promote it on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, etc. So just like with the internet, new media technology does not change social relationships. It enhances them.
Right.
So the horrors that we saw between black people and radio are being enhanced in the internet area, not being changed or improved.
And most of my students, to answer that, Tamara, I would say in the courses when we're looking at hip hop and others, they tell me they don't listen to radio. I mean, this is their radio. This is everything for them. So I'm not saying it's not relevant, but most of my students they're creating their own DJ. They're creating their own playlists. I mean, if it's iTunes or what have you.
I hear that.
Yeah.
And their playlist it's still the same playlist. So I know it sounds cool to say you don't listen, but when your 9-year-old tells you that Future's a mumble rapper, where's he get it from? Did he just happen to get it? And a lot of these things are on video games, and they hear them in rotation there. That's the new place now. So you got to monitor what kids are listening to, even when it comes to a game now. And because the lyrics and the visuals teach you to shoot, kill in rapid fashion. And the music gets pumped in there. So it's great that you mention it, that there's this new forms, but the game remains the same.
But I think by empowering our young people to have what we call media literacy, like, I have a 10-year-old, I have a 25-year-old, and even with my students, and just some of the experiences with using, our industry ears or rap rehab, but just getting them to sort of be able to critique and analyze. I mean, we're being bombarded, all of us, with so much media. It's overwhelming. Garbage, good, great, but at the same time, they have to have this, to be able to have a language and to be able to break this down critically. And so I think this is why we do what we do at Bowie State, and I'm sure at Morgan and other places, is looking at tools that they can use to understand, the industry versus the art. We get into this conversation often, especially with hip hop. There's the hip hop as an industry and hip hop as a culture and art form or phenomena. So just having these kinds of conversations, having these types of courses that we have, I think are just a few small steps we could take in terms of trying to empower our young people to be able to break down a lot of this media they're being overwhelmed with.
Final thoughts, Dr. Ball. I like to call him doctor. I knew him before he was a doctor.
And I'm still paying for the degree, so I appreciate the mention of it. So, no, my final thoughts would just be, buy Paul's book. Even if I was not a friend, if I was not a student, I would promote the book because it's that good. And if I was not in agreement with the book or didn't feel that it was this good, I would have found a polite way to not be up here with you. I'm busy. I can't. My daughters need me or something. And I think that I would just add one other point about that we do need to look critically at the relationship between power, politics, and popular media. And that all that is popular, I argue, is fraudulent given the context of our political environment. Nothing that we see is an honest representation of what it claims to be. And then finally, as always, as Fred Hampton used to say, I say peace to you if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody, and thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh,
Okay.
sure.
Oh,
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
That's a question on ownership.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yes, my name is Brian Anderson. I have a question on ownership. Do you think blacks owning media outlets, radio stations, or streaming services like you see the Jay-Z with his stake in Tidal, do you think doing that will influence the images and the messages that we portray and put out there? And if not, what are the solutions that you have?
You know, I think it's always an answer, but until there's a balance and there's a consistency, it really doesn't make a difference. I'm all for changing faces, but I you know, if you want to do the same thing that everybody else is doing it and doing it in blackface, what's the difference, you know? But I'm hoping for it, and that's why I got my own. I can set my own standard now. You know, the best thing about my radio station, The Wire, down in Orlando, is when I get the stats in the market, the hip-hop stations with iHeart and Cox, they average 25 minutes, the average listener. My station's 55 minutes, okay? But I don't have, you know, 200,000 watts, so I can't reach as far, but I know my product is better, and it's the product that they tell me that won't work.
One more question or comment?
So, aren't we looking at kind of a paradox here where we're trying to censor what our younger people are listening to? I mean, we know that art has always...
Well, before we go here, real quick, it's the opposite of censorship. They're only getting a steady diet of hate. They're not getting balance.
That's the paradox.
Okay.
That is the paradox, right? So we want to feed in what we want and take out what we don't want. And so when you go down that road, it's kind of a slippery slope. Everybody in this conversation. So when you go down that road, it's kind of a slippery slope. I don't disagree that we need to pull back on some of the negative, violent, misogynistic messages that are constantly being, you know, go out there to our people. How do we do it such that those who would censor us, whatever message that is, that we're trying to get out, how do we do it in such a way that that we can do and accomplish what we're trying to accomplish?
The reason why I got sort of passionate with you, because I've heard this claim, and I'm not saying from you, but all the time, that you want to censor people by allowing real stories to be told. So when I hear dope MCs like Rhapsody or this never get a record played ever in their careers, and they uplift, like there was a record by Sho Baraka that I just loved, put it in heavy rotation because it was that good. Call folks around, and getting back to your point, it's just about telling our stories, you know, and they all don't have to be great stories or uplifting or socially conscious, but there was a time where we got a balance of love and the stories of music. You know, the first time I remember hearing Gil Scott-Heron in The Bottle years ago, I mean, he told that story as a poet, you know, and it was musical, and, you know, when I listened to the words, I thought of my drunk uncle, you know? And I'm not saying every story that we tell has to be uplifting, but I'm worried that it's just the exact opposite, that these corporations that control the playlist, so where, you know, I know who makes up the playlist for Radio 1. It's Jay Stevens. Jay might be a cool guy, he gives everybody, but he knows nothing about the community that he serves.
Not that race is everything, but I do think you should explain racially what category he resides in.
Well, he's a white guy and a cool white guy, you know?
At Radio 1, though, that's the point. That's what I'm saying. Black.
Yeah. So I don't get a chance to program a country station. Okay? It'll never happen, let alone program a chain of 50 stations across the country. And it just will never happen. So things change, you know, and you gotta look at that and why there's not that passion. I remember when Jeff Lee told me a story of going to Jimmy Iovine's house, who was the guy from Interscope. And he was pissed off because Jimmy Iovine's kids were outside riding horses in the back and never listened to the music of Death Row and all the people on his label. They lived in a completely different world. And that's the issue. You know, so when I hear I'm in love with the Coco bringing that record back, and I know that I used to go buy crack on Sutphin Boulevard in Jamaica, Queens, and know where the crack deal is, that's real for me. And hearing and getting conditioned to hear these records, you think it's okay in your neighborhood. You think that guy who's hustling like that is okay. And it doesn't happen in other formats. It doesn't happen with real owners that care, because you can win. There's enough music out there to play that you don't have to give poison 24/7. That is lazy, really lazy, and they have really bad ears. And music used to be about ears. Go ahead.
Plus, real quick, real censorship is political, not linguistic. So when Young Jeezy was on Iovine's label and wanted to put out a record, F the Police, not in a revolutionary sense, but saying I'm gonna sell drugs and no cop can stop me, Jimmy Iovine said you can't say F the police on a record. Yeah. You can say F you and you and you and you, and I'm gonna sell drugs to you, you and you and you, but as soon as he said F the police, and even in a non-revolutionary sense, that was censored. So that's my point. It's not linguistic, it's political. I'm sorry for, you know.
You're good. This is all fascinating. My name is Janine Cogney, and I was the R&B music editor at Billboard magazine in New York. At the time, Fuck the Police came out. At the time, Two Live Crew became prominent. At the time, hip-hop was really starting to infiltrate commercial radio. And as a girl from the South Bronx, I grew up loving hip-hop. I grew up loving radio and hanging on to the words of every DJ and, you know, knowing all the songs. And so I get to Billboard in this fever of excitement to be in the industry, and then, you know, my illusions are smashed, because now I'm finding out what really goes on behind closed doors, how the radio industry really works, and how some of the industry is still, to this day, misogynist. You know, I'm like Little Red Riding Hood going through the forest of, you know, record promoters and radio parties at strip joints and hip-hop artists that I come to interview, and they're like, you got on too many clothes, girl. So, and then I ended up at R&B Airplay Monitor, another magazine, which was specifically about the radio industry, and we had charts, and I thought those charts had value, and they do. But there is a whole game of promotion that Paul really talks about, and that's why I really appreciate his book, because he kind of talks about walking through that wonderland, if you will, and deciding, how do I survive in this place, this industry that I want to be in, and not compromise myself? And sometimes you don't make the right decisions. So all that being said, and I didn't want to take over, but now I wonder, now that we have all these different media outlets, would you still advise somebody to go into a career in radio?
Well, you know, thank you for that, Janine. I wouldn't recommend them to do it if they want to eat. You know, if you want to have a good career, there's only thing that pays is a morning show. But, you know, your comment on that bubble being blown is funny. This book, and I've got a lot of good friends in the industry over the years, and there's a buddy of mine, Jay Dixon, who works at Hot 97 and BLS in New York. And for 40 years, I've been telling them how dirty the industry was and how different. But Jay's always, hey, we're listening to research, and I love him. He's like my brother. But he read the book. And he started talking to other people. And he found out everything in the book is true. And he finally believed me because it was in a book and I told real stories. And there's a lot of industry books, but they're always from some star point of view. They're always Steve Stout and making deals and, yo, the only deal I'm trying to do is get home, okay? I'm not getting rich, and I could be wide open and talk, because, look, my house is paid for, I'm cash poor, but I can afford to live in Florida if I gotta eat oranges and bananas on my property and shop for fish. So I don't have to call up anybody for a job. I might not be able to help you out if you need some money, but I can be me. And that's why I wanted to put it in a book, because ain't nobody can tell me it's not true. Ain't nobody, and if you don't know, you should. And that's the thing. This industry is so glossed up. You know, we always talk about Jay-Z and Bey, but we don't talk about the artists that are talented, pure, that touch your heart and soul. It's funny, Lisa always used to go, you know, back in the day, oh, he speaks to me. You know, and that's the feeling that's gone when artists speak to you. And that's what I thought music was supposed to be about. And we've kind of lost that. I hope maybe this conversation has led us all to think a little bit more, to reach out and touch folks and do some of the work. This can't be about talking.
Okay, so
One more.
Sure, thank you.
It's not really a question, it's a statement. I'm going to address what you last said and what the brother back there said, okay? As far as I'm concerned, everything that we've learned has been indirectly indoctrinated through slavery. So that's our form of communication, how we process everything. It goes back to the Willie Lynch letter, it goes back to the Bible, and everything else in that sense. So it's not about censorship. It's about what we're being fed. Are we getting fed hog maws and chitlins and poison? Or are we getting taken away from the steak and the corn and the healthy food? No, we're not. We're just not giving it. So that's just one issue right there. The second part is I fell in love with hip-hop in 1983. I was sitting on my grandfather's stoop. Paul knows my grandfather very well, friend of the family, my uncle. I was sitting down, and I was listening to Kiss, and it was DJ Red Alert, Kiss Master Mix. And Run DMC's Rock Box came on. And if you ever heard how it comes in, cause you are fresh. So it's giving you this new, fresh sound. And it's actually giving you positivity. It's giving you a vibrance and vitality that you haven't even heard before. Now, right now, if I'm not mistaken, I just read an article. Hip-hop is the #1 medium in the world. It has surpassed rock and roll. Now you have to go back to the slavery, to the Bible, see how it went from Run DMC to say, oh, the record execs and everybody said, oh, these black guys, they like it, it's popular. So now they're utilizing a tool that we have created to free ourselves to become another byproduct of systemic slavery. So that's where you have to address the psychology of the situation, not what's being presented to you, because you can have poison presented to you, you can say, oh, that's hot, don't touch it, but you still might touch it anyway. What you have to do is use discernment for your own, and that comes from your village, that comes from your parents, that comes from your grandparents, that comes from your neighbors. So it's not about what we're being censored from, but more so what we're giving and what we're willing to take what we're given in that sense. Instead of saying, demanding, oh, I want fresh food. Yeah. I want new music. And there's plenty of stuff like that. And as far as the last thing was addressed to Paul about being a radio station DJ. I just asked him 2 days ago. I still want to do that. It was him and his guidance when I was 13 years old, checking him out at 93 KYS, him giving me some records, which led to me having a career at a radio station at my own school, Virginia State University. And I was told I was only supposed to play contemporary jazz. I call it that pop, the progressive jazz, gyro spira. That's not jazz. That's something else. So let me get to my point. So in that point was, I said, you know what, guys, I'm going to do for us, the listeners, the audience. I commanded that. I put on John Coltrane's Inchworm. I immediately got a red buzzer on my phone. I said to myself, I know who that is. That's my program director, Will Harris, saying, you know what, you're in trouble because I told you not to play that. And I'm saying I'm playing it anyway because that's what the listeners want to hear. So you got to play what the listeners want to hear. That's what makes you want.
But that's not the real world. They tell you what you want to hear.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Tony. You want to wrap things up?
Yeah. I mean, I think going back to the brother's point in the back, I think it comes down to balance. As opposed to censorship. I mean, in terms of if it's media, I'm a filmmaker. I just came back from Black Star in Philly. Ava DuVernay was there. A lot of other filmmakers were there. And so I think we were having the same conversation we're having tonight about media, about television, about film, and our images as people. And I think it comes down to balance, and especially whether it be music or whether it be the media, we have to empower our young people to be able to tell their own stories. I mean, at the root of hip-hop, and I grew up in the same era you did, is the story. The African oral tradition, we go back thousands of years beyond slavery, So I think coming back to being able to be just storytellers, innovative storytellers, empowering our young people to look at a balance. I mean, yeah, I can give you McDonald's, or I can make grandma can make you a home-cooked meal. Which one is going to taste better? But if you've only had the same thing over and over again, you don't know. So I think it goes back to having a balance, a variety of images, music, access to media, media literacy for our young people as well.
Any final thoughts?
No, I gave my final thoughts. I just thank you and thank everybody again. Yes. I appreciate it.
Okay.
I just want to thank everybody for coming out. I think over the years, man, it's been a long ride, and the beauty about putting out this book is I got to tell a story that I think that was important in my life, and hopefully that'll touch some other lives. There's a lot of beautiful people in this room, a lot that I've known a long time, a lot that means so much to me, and that's what is really, really important. So if if you're thinking about giving a gift, I say give Blackout the book this Christmas.
And on that note,
And I'd like to thank, the funny thing is, Rhonda Dallas here, she grew up right behind my house on the same block. So it's just funny how, this time, some things don't change, and real things are, real people are special, and they always come through. So I appreciate you guys coming out. Thank you. And guess what? I'm not with a major publisher. I'm myself, and everybody that's come through, I say tell a friend to tell a friend about Blackout. And I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ball, Morgan State University, Tedros, Melchishua, Bowie State University.
Give them a nice round of applause.
Paul Porter, yes. And I also want to say that books are available for sale at the bookstore. Paul will be here to sign books and to talk further. And so thank you all for coming out on behalf of the Prince George's Arts and Humanities Council. Stay tuned for more events. Thank you so much.
Thank you, CSpan.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.